Well, I want to welcome you to our program today, and we have a very special guest with us. Her name is Viki Scherer. She's from Decatur, Illinois, and she works as an administrative assistant for the Harvest Christian Center in Decatur. And so at this time, I want to welcome you, Viki. Yeah, good to have you with us
Hi,
today.
thank you.
And today the topic is journeying with ALS, which isn't an easy thing at all. And so at this time, to kind of get us started, I want to read for a couple of Bible verses. The one is from Romans chapter 8, verse 28. And so these are some things that I want for us to keep in mind as we go through this interview. And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. And then I also think about what Peter wrote in 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 3 through 9. Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. In his great mercy, he has given us new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, and into an inheritance that can never perish, spoil, or fade, kept in heaven for you, who, through faith, are shielded by God's power until the coming of the salvation that is ready to be revealed in the last time. In this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. These have come so that your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may be proved genuine, and may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. Though you have not seen him, you love him. And even though you do not see him now, you believe in him and are filled with an inexpressible and glorious joy. For you are receiving the goal of your faith, the salvation of your souls. And so Viki is a speaker and also an author. And so, Viki, I just want to, as we think about, we hear about ALS, otherwise known as Lou Gehrig's disease.
Right.
And right away, when we think about Lou Gehrig was that well-known baseball player that played for the New York Yankees. They called him the Iron Man. He had, the most successive games in a row without ever sitting down, having an injury or anything. And so you look at a man who is so strong, but then he comes down with this disease called ALS.
Right.
It totally debilitated him. Well, actually, it brought his death.
Right.
And so, Viki, what exactly is ALS?
Okay. ALS, it's an acronym for amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. And so obviously a lot of people call it Lou Gehrig's disease. It's easier to remember it by that term. Lou Gehrig was the first famous person or a person of notoriety that had that disease, and so that's kind of why they call it Lou Gehrig's disease. It deals with your spinal cord, your nerves don't send the right messages to your muscles, so your muscles atrophy and die. And you don't know from day to day, all of a sudden, which muscles might say, that's it, I'm not going to work anymore. And your whole body is controlled by muscles. And there's many in the medical profession. I have several doctors and nurses in my family, and they all say it is the worst disease out there because your mind is 100% sharp, but you could look at your hands or you could look at your feet and tell them to do something, and they're not able to as those muscles atrophy and die.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so your husband, Doug, right?
Yes.
Your husband, Doug, was diagnosed with this disease when?
The official diagnosis came on November 8th of 2007, but as we look back, he probably had the disease all that year. We had gone to Israel that summer in June of 2007 to celebrate our 25th wedding anniversary, and it was an awesome trip. But while we were there, he fell a couple times, but the terrain is rough. Anybody who's been to Israel, it's not it's not difficult to understand why you might lose your footing. And but we still, we just didn't think too much about it. And then the next month, he started having twitches. His arms would just like alive. Mm-hmm. But I think sometimes if you put it in the back of your mind, it's not there. If you ignore it, mm-hmm. it's not there. And then in September of that year, we were getting ready to go to a wedding. And Doug could not tie his tie. And it was so weird because he had taught our son's friends when they were all younger, all the boys used to hang out at our house, how to tie a tie. And it's like, why can't you tie your tie? And then he started to trip and fall. And then I saw him fall in the house. And I knew something wasn't right. So I got online and started, I used to be a newspaper reporter, so I started doing my investigative reporting. And I already knew what the verdict was. His mom and his aunt had died of ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. And so that's what he ended up with. He was officially diagnosed on November 8th of 2007. I was devastated. I couldn't believe it. And 4 days later was his last day to work. Our daughter was starting college at Northern Illinois University. We'd already gotten our son through school, and we were going to try and get Sarah through. And here's Doug not going to be able to work, and I was working as a substitute teacher. And I'll be honest with you, I cried on my way to school. I cried while I was at school. I cried on my way home. It's like, God, how could you be doing this to us? Doug's a good guy. Everybody liked Doug. He was a bus driver. He had a music education degree, but he didn't go into teaching. And everywhere we went, everybody knew Doug. And here he is all of a sudden with this horrible disease.
Yeah, it's like your life just comes crashing down when you hear something like this.
Oh, I couldn't believe it. Mm-hmm. And I had one of those moments, a pity party, and was just really crying out to God one day. And it's like Hannah in the Old Testament when she was crying so much. She was crying out to God, and Eli wondered what was going on with her. And I kind of had that moment, and couldn't even hardly talk and express what I was going through. And it was just like, you're sitting right there. It was just like Jesus stood right by me and spoke these words. For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. And I said, okay, God, I don't know how I'm going to do it, but right at this moment in time, I'm going to trust you through this horrible situation. I'm going to still believe for God to heal him, but I'm going to put my trust in you. And from that moment on, I think that's really the kind of faith that God is looking for, just for us to trust him, even though it may be a very bleak situation.
Yeah, so as far as ALS, is there any known cause of this disease? It's not really...
Not really. Doug ended up with familial ALS. His mother and his aunt had died of the disease. Only 10% of the cases are considered familial. They continue to do lots of research. Doug was in experimental drug research at Washington University Medical Research Center in St. Louis, and they're trying to find what causes it. They know in some cases there's a gene that's prevalent in some of the individuals, but most of the cases of ALS, and there's about 5,600 cases a year that are diagnosed, most of them are what they would consider sporadic, that there's nobody in the family who's ever had the disease. And usually the lifetime span that a person has with the disease is 2 to 5 years. Some are less, some are more. Only 10% of the cases are live 10 years.
Yeah, so the life expectancy isn't very long then once you're diagnosed with this.
Right, right. Yeah. Doug's mom only lived 3 months.
Is that right?
Yeah, but nobody in the family had ever had the disease. It was 1989 when she was diagnosed, and we didn't know anything about the disease, and I think she had probably been progressing quite a bit with the disease before she was officially diagnosed with it.
And there's no cure for this disease.
That's correct.
And of course the nature of a disease is that it continues to get progress and get worse until death.
Right.
And but as far as research, you mentioned that Doug was part of a research. Mm-hmm. Have they made any, has there been any strides made in this whole effort?
They are making great strides with clinical studies. And when Doug was in St. Louis, we made so many trips to St. Louis. I just point the handicap van and it just go to St. Louis. But the neurologists all believe that someday they will be able to find a cure or to be able to stem the progression of the disease. And there's studies all the time that are coming out with information about it.
So it's encouraging.
Yes.
Yeah, the work that's being done.
Right.
That there's hope out there, hopefully in the near future.
Right.
You know, to bring relief for people who are suffering with this and also
Right.
for their families. Okay, so Doug, would you consider that throughout his life he's been a real healthy man before he got this? And it wasn't like anything from the time of his being a little child to see he was always sickly and now...
No, he was definitely healthy, and he worked 31 years and had one sick day in 31 years when he was diagnosed with the disease.
So he was a very healthy man who got this. Well, just like Lou Gehrig.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So it just shows that you can debilitate a very strong and healthy person.
Right, and a lot of times it seems that the disease occurs when the people are getting towards retirement or a little bit later in life. But young people can have it too. Teenagers, people in their 20s can be diagnosed with it.
But it's not as common amongst, for instance, young adults.
That's right. It's usually older ones that have a tendency to get it.
As they get close to retirement.
Well, yeah, 50s, 60s. Doug was in his 50s when he was diagnosed with the disease. And but we were so blessed because I think from that moment when I cried out to God, I said, okay, I don't understand this. I don't know what's going to happen. And so we got involved with the ALS Association in St. Louis and the Muscular Dystrophy Association also. And they were wonderful places to help us with equipment needs. It's not uncommon for a person with ALS to have medical and equipment needs of $200,000 a year.
Wow. Isn't that just unbelievable?
That is, I mean, that's pretty mind-boggling. You're having to make your home handicap accessible. You're having to get equipment all the time. We tried so many different pieces of equipment. Sometimes something would work for him that didn't work for another person with ALS, or it would work for a little while, and then he would lose some more muscles, and then, as we went on. I lifted him by myself as the time came when he could not walk anymore, and until October of 2009. And I tell everybody I could arm wrestle anyone back in those days. And, and I quoted Philippians 4:13 many, many times. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And it was by God's grace that I did that. I don't know how else to explain it except that he gave me the strength to lift him and take care of him. And it was 24/7 care as the disease went on.
So you cried out to God, which a person of faith will do. You know, in those questions of why and I don't understand this. Why is this given to us? Which are natural questions. I mean, when something like this happens, when all of a sudden ALS is at your door, you've been diagnosed, and all of a sudden you are facing life in a whole different way. I mean, we go through our challenges in life, but now this puts it at a whole different level. Like you say, just now having to be the caretaker and you probably never thought that that's what you'd be doing in life, but now here you are.
Actually, my mom lives with us, and my mom had lived with me since my dad died in 1993. So I had already been a caregiver for her at times. So then I had my husband and my mom trying to help with both of them. But God met our needs in so many wonderful ways. We didn't qualify to have a wheelchair or a wheelchair ramp built. Those are extremely expensive. We lived in a tri-level home, so we had to have a huge one. And it's just amazing how the people people donated money and helped us to be able to get that built. We needed, because it's a tri-level home, we needed 2 stair lifts because the time would come when Doug could not walk down steps. And so there was a church in a nearby small town. They were having an elevator put in their church. And I just am amazed at how God would just plant people in our lives. Perfect timing, divine appointments, you might say. And somebody told us about this church. And this lady said, well, there's a stair lift there. So Doug and I went, and Doug was still walking at the time. So we go to this church to see the stair lift. They actually had 2 stair lifts with the rails that were the size of what we needed for our house. And it was a long wait, but through a series of events, anyway, their board voted to give us both of those stair lifts. And we got them installed in our home. And that's how I kept my husband at home, didn't have to put him in a hospital or a nursing home, and was able to take care of him all the time.
God was really has been providing for you all along.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that Viki is an author, and she has written a book entitled "Where There Is Faith, He Is With You." And so this book, you were able to, chapter by chapter, kind of explain just some of the things about what you've just shared about your journey and how God has been with you and has helped you and strengthened you during this time. And so the book was published back in 2011.
Right.
And so why don't we just kind of look at this book a little bit?
Okay.
Your book, and this book can be purchased on Amazon.com?
We don't have it there. We have it through my family's ministry, so through the houseofprayerministries.com.
Houseofprayerministries.com.
Right.
Okay.
And you can purchase the book that way. We have it in some of the bookstores in Illinois. And, of course, when I speak, I have it available that way. But, yeah, www.houseofprayerministries.com you can get on, or .org, and you can get the book that way. And there's I was really encouraged to write the book. People in the medical profession said they were just amazed at how we were able to share our faith during this ordeal, and we weren't ashamed of the gospel of Christ. The ALS Association in St. Louis picked us in 2009 as a family that best exemplifies the spirit of ALS across America for the state of Illinois. So Doug and I did TV and newspaper interviews in Illinois, and then they picked us in May of that year. We attended the National ALS Policy Conference and the National ALS Advocacy Day in Washington, D.C. And that was awesome. We went to congressmen and senators' offices sharing our story and telling others about it. So I was encouraged. So I kind of kept a journal, lots of different books of what we went through, and then used it as a basis to write this book.
Yeah, so you've gotten some real special recognition and being able to go to Washington, D.C. and so as I think back at the Bible verse or passage that I read from 1 Peter chapter 1, that this whole thing could have easily have consumed your faith, consumed you, but instead, I see where you use this, that God has used this as a time for you to be strengthened, but also as a witness.
Right. And I think, and what I like to do is to share some of the ways that God met our needs. One of them is a gas angel. Would you mind if I shared that story?
Yeah. Let's talk about the gas angel.
All
I'm
right.
curious.
Okay. In 2008, Doug was really progressing with the disease, and I had gone to a gas station to fill up our van, and the price was low then, although today it's kind of low, and I didn't want to go to a prepaid pump because I didn't know how much it was going to cost to fill the van up. So I get there, and it is actually like 5 o'clock in the evening. Actually, I needed to be home. It was supper time to fix supper. By this time, Doug could not feed himself, so I was having to feed him and then get the kitchen cleaned up and then get to church. I was teaching on the book of Zechariah. So I go to this gas station, go to this pump that's not a prepay one. There's a lady that's the driver of the car. She's standing up by the gas station doors talking on her cell phone. And I'm like, would you please hurry up and get to your car so that I can get my van filled up and get home? And I thought about pulling over to the other side of the pump, which was also not a prepay. Some guy in a huge SUV pulls up. It must have been on E. He is filling and filling and filling and filling this thing. Finally, he gets done, and I'm still thinking of pulling around behind him. He starts to wash every single window on this SUV. Finally, the lady comes to the car, and I'm thinking, good, she's going to finally drive away. Then she starts to fill the car up with gas.
Oh, no.
She hadn't even done it yet. So, and a woman pulls up in front of the gentleman in the SUV, and I knew her, and I said hi, and she asked how Doug was doing, and I said, well, he's progressing with the disease, and that was the extent of our conversation. The guy in the SUV then opens the hood up in his SUV, looking at something in the engine. So I'm staying put where I'm at. Finally, the lady gets her car filled up and takes off. I get my van filled up. I go up to the door. I'm going to go inside to pay for the fill up. And the lady that was standing or was there in front of the gentleman with the SUV, she's standing up there with her credit card in the air like this, and she says, I've got it. She paid for my fill up.
Oh.
And then she said, can you use the Thanksgiving basket? And it was so humbling for my husband and me because we were always ones to help people not be a recipient of receiving things. We actually ended up getting 2 Thanksgiving baskets from her. Then that lady said, I would like to meet you every month at the gas station and pay for your fill-up.
Isn't that something?
Can't you just see every angel in heaven delaying me and delaying me? And now it's a story that is touching so many lives that I try to encourage people to do random acts of kindness.
Yes.
This lady didn't know me very well. I mean, she's just an acquaintance, and that was it. And how God has used that story for me to encourage others. And there's just, my book is filled with so many neat stories.
Yeah, I see that. You got 13 chapters here, and you got a Bible verse to begin each chapter.
Right.
And each one of these Bible verses, I'm sure, has been a real encouragement to you.
Right.
For whatever, okay, and then you write a chapter. Well, like for instance, chapter 1. You have Luke chapter 1, verse 45, and it's entitled, Blessed is She Who Believed.
Would you like to hear what that one's about?
Yeah.
Okay. I was a real women's liver before I got saved. I was never going to get married, let alone have kids. Not for me. And Doug had come to my family's church and attended a service, and I just happened to be home that night. I do not remember meeting him that night, but he decided I was the one for him. And like I said, I was not going to get married. It was not my thing. And so as time went on, I found out he tried to call me. I was away at college. He'd already graduated, and he was long gone. He was 5 years older than me, trying to get a hold of, he just didn't have the nerve to dial the last number of the phone call. And in the meantime, and I didn't know that, God is really dealing with me. And finally, I made this prayer of, okay, God, I'm realizing that I need somebody to love, and I want someone to love me. So I was going to just give that to the Lord. A week later, Doug invites me out on our date. We had our first date. And we went out. We had a whirlwind courtship, and we were engaged within a short amount of time. We'd set August 1976 to be our wedding date, and everything's going great. I graduated from college with honors, and my engagement announcements in the newspaper, everything's going on. And then a few days later, Doug said he needed to talk to me, and he said he was breaking off the engagement because he was just not ready for the commitment of marriage and children. And I went crying to my room, gave him the wedding or the engagement ring back, and crying to my bedroom, just like any normal woman. And I said, okay, God, if I'm supposed to marry Doug, I want to open up my Bible to the wedding feast of Cana in John. I randomly opened my Bible, and it was not to that, but it was to Luke 1:45, and it said, Blessed is she who believed that there would be a fulfillment of what had been spoken to her by the Lord. For 6 years, I held on to that verse. And then God did great things and brought us back together. And we got married, obviously. And but I think God used that. He used that time to build character in my life. And I knew that marriage was a covenant. And so that when Doug got sick, I was going to take care of him. We made a covenant of marriage. And I think that helped me through it.
Yeah.
It's pretty neat.
That's really, yeah. So it's really quite every one of these chapters really is quite a story. That of how God has entered into your life,
right,
into your life situation. And so this book, I really encourage people to buy it, because not only is it an encouragement for people who, where somebody's suffering from ALS, but it's really for anybody who is going through a struggle, whether
Right.
it's a health concern or otherwise.
Right. Or if they are a caregiver, or if they're struggling in their faith, or if they've lost a loved one. And it's really touching people. And I wrote an epilogue, and the epilogue are the arguments that people have perhaps against salvation or different reasons that they might have. And I took scripture verses to counter their arguments. And it's been amazing how God has used that also to touch lives.
Yeah, isn't that something? Well, this is a book, I look forward to reading this, I really do. And, okay, so you wrote this book
Right.
that people are reading, but also you have, you're also a speaker.
Yes.
And it sounds like you've got quite a schedule. How many times have you spoken already this year?
By the end, I don't know, it's been probably 20 sometimes, 25 times. It'll be 30 times by the end of the year, over 30 times.
Over 30 speaking engagements.
Speaking engagements for Stonecroft Ministries. I've also have done some presentations on Israel, which has been pretty interesting, and how God is opening the doors for that also. But yeah, and Pastor Jeff, I haven't done anything. Every speaking engagement has come to me, and I marvel at God taking a story and working a Romans 8:28, as you opened up this TV program with, how He has taken something that was so devastating and so difficult, but now I have a greater understanding of other widows and what other people are going through. I would not have had any idea how to even have any empathy or compassion towards them.
Yeah, well, Vicki, I'll tell you, this has been really quite an inspiration. You are an inspiration to me and to all of us. And so I just want to thank you so much for being on our program today. Here again, her book, Where There Is Faith, He is With You. And then also, she is a speaker, a person who could come to a gathering, to your church, to a conference. And so, Vicki, God bless you for your ministry and Godspeed as you continue to do His work. And I also just want to thank all of you for joining us this day.